Good afternoon, passengers. Welcome to Martel Air. My name's Amanda, and I'll be your pilot for today. We're just beginning boarding for flight number 25 from Lizard Island to Lockhart River. So grab your seats while I finish up the last steps of the pre-flight inspections of this Cessna Grand Caravan, the pride of the Martel Air fleet. Before engine start, checklist. Pre-flight inspection complete. Parking brake handle set. Electrical system switches off. Ignition switch normal. Fuel tank selectors both on. Lead air heat switch off. Power lever idle. Prop RPM lever max. Fuel condition lever cut off. Fuel shut off knob fully in check. Battery switch on. Cabin lights on. Cockpit lighting set. Flaps up. No smoking lights on. Before engine start, checklist complete. Good afternoon, passengers. The weather today is sunny and exceptionally windy here on Lizard Island. We're cruising at an altitude of about 8,000 feet. Flying over more of the Cape York Peninsula as we go north, including Cape Melville as the major landmark. Your cabin crew today is me, assisted as always by my co-pilot, Wing Commander Lamington, and your emergency exits are located to the back of the cabin where you enter the plane. I also have a door up here by me, and if you see me leave, please follow me quickly. Our in-flight catering services are provided by our wonderful passengers, so I hope you packed something interesting. We also have a co-feed machine in the back for those who'd like to support the channel, and Wing Commander Lamington's dog treat habit. Engine start checklist. Battery switch on. Beacon lights on. Avionics 1 on. Bus volts check. Emergency power lever normal. Inertial separator handle bypass. EIS readings check. Propeller area clear. Fuel boost switch on. Fuel boost on shown check. Fuel pressure low not shown check. Fuel flow 0 check. Starter switch start. Ignition on shown check. Oil PSI readings check. NG climbing. NG stable. Fuel condition lever low idle. Fuel flow expected range check. NG climbing. NG stable. Starter switch off. EIS readings check. Generator load check. Battery amps positive check. Fuel boost switch normal. Avionics 2 on. Nav lights on. Engine start checklist complete. We're now ready for departure, so please fasten your seatbelts and turn off your devices apart from those used to watch this stream. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Before departure taxi checklist. Taxi lights on, seatbelt lights on, taxi clearance. I think we'll be using the runway just behind us, which is 12. We'll find out what the wind's like. Unfortunately, there's no weather information available for Lizard Island Tiny Airport. So Lizard Island traffic, Martel 25 is taxiing to runway 12 for takeoff. Taxi clearance check, nav source set, prop RPM minimum, fuel condition low idle, inertial separator bypass, parking brake off. Before departure taxi checklist complete. And it will be a very short taxi given that that's the runway. We just do our checks around to make sure that there's nothing in our way. Lovely. Okay, ready for taxi. Could use a little bit more of the runway over there, but that would involve getting past another plane on a very narrow taxiway. And a very narrow runway as well, of course. Okay. Or takeoff checklist. Parking brake set. Altimeter QNH set. Standby flight instruments check. Fuel boost switch normal. Fuel tank selectors both on. Fuel quantity check. Fuel shut-off knob fully in check. Standby alt power on. Anti-ice system not required at 24 degrees. Inertial separator handle will remain in bypass. Autopilot preparations. Altitude set for initial cruise. Set. Flight level change mode engaged. Set to VY. Heading mode engaged. Set for runway heading. And bank mode engaged. Autopilot prepared. Nav source is set. Transponder. Alt. Flaps to takeoff position. YLZI Island traffic, Martel 25, entering runway 12 for takeoff, west departure. Takeoff clearance check. Strobe lights on, landing lights on, taxi lights off, seatbelt light on, parking brake release, fuel condition high idle, prop RPM to max. Before takeoff checklist complete. Now, being a very narrow runway, we will be being cautious in our lineup. So the last thing we want is to come off one side or the other. There we go. Flaps are set for takeoff. And advance the power, set for takeoff. Just kind of leapt into the sky there. Looks like the magnetic heading of the runway is nothing like what the runway numbering would suggest, but that's okay. Of about 30 knots, so that's quite spicy for an aircraft of this size. I think it's quite spicy for most aircraft. Brisbane Centre, Martel 25, beside Cessna Caravan, 3 miles southeast of YLZI Island, 2,000 feet, west flight following. Squawk 0767, Martel 25. Roger, confirm radar contact, Martel 25. Okay, there we go. So we're climbing out of the traffic area, so landing lights off. And we'll start our turn towards our actual nav path. Low clouds as we come through here. Now, one thing that I'm going to be checking a little bit later on is what the sound quality on this is like, because this is my first stream with my new microphone. I have upgraded from the microphone on this headset, which was doing well enough, you know, is good enough for a video conference. But now we've got a Blue Yeti, which is ironically pink, which is hopefully giving us a little bit better sound quality. It's definitely been improving it on what I can see through the testing that I've done, but a little bit of outside my own head feedback is always lovely. So if you are in the quiet part of the passenger cabin, feel free to leave a comment on the recording to let me know what you think of the new microphone. And if we get anyone actually in chat, I will be asking them to. Cruise climb checklist, anti-ice not required, inertial separator handle normal, airspeed set to VY, prop RPM in required range, power lever set for climb, IGT range acceptable. Last stream, which is a couple of weeks ago now because I missed one due to essentially health reasons. We had the fun of landing into heavy headwinds, which was quite a bumpy little experience, and today we had the experience of taking off into heavy headwinds. And the fun thing there is that if you've got a 25 knot headwind, then you've essentially got 25 knots of speed for free. Because if you're trying to generate lift, what matters is the airspeed. And if the air's already doing 25, you only really need to do 50 across the ground to get to your 75 knot rotate speed. Well, 75, more like, I think it's 74 on this. Settings. Oh, this says 70. It's in the manual. It's 70 to 75, I think. 70, 74. Anyway. Yes. And as I've continued researching all of the places that we're flying into, past, near, there's been some interesting things come up because I have no idea about all the places we're actually going past, because we're definitely we're past the bits of Australia I've never been to and into the parts of Australia that I've mostly heard stories about. And of course, with looking up things about the various places that we're going to be going past, I have of course not thought of something for the main topic of rambling for today, which usually comes up from conversations with passengers, but the passenger cabin seems to be fairly quiet at the moment. So I was looking up the airport that we're heading for, Lockhart River. So as we get further north, we go further and further from anywhere that has huge populations, because this is, you know, far north Queensland. There are much more Aboriginal communities up this way and much fewer large cities, which gets a little interesting. Lockhart River Airport was actually constructed during World War II as Iron Range Airport, which was a US military base. So what is now Lockhart River Airport was Iron Range Airport, which was home to B-26 Marauder and B-17 Flying Fortress bomber squadrons. So both basing them and being a supply and repair depot, because we're getting into those parts of Australia that have World War II history, other than places that local stuff was based and sent out from, or anything like that. We're getting into places that were actively involved. Going to 118.2, Martel 25. Goodbye. Brisbane Centre, Martel 25, entering your airspace 8,000 feet. So yes, as just off to kind of directly north from here, we have the Solomon Islands, which has rather a lot of World War II history in the Solomon Islands campaign. The largest island, of course, being Guadalcanal. Oh no, the largest island is Bougainville. But, you know, this is where you have Guadalcanal and Iron Bottom Sound and Tulagi and all of these other places that you'll have heard of if you've looked at World War II Pacific history. It's all quite dramatic and involved, of course, as war history stuff tends to be. And the Australian mainland, not too far away, turns out to have been rather good for basing the larger bombers from, because you're not going to base them out of the places much closer in. You know, classically you have making sure I'm giving correct information. Yes, on Guadalcanal you have Henderson Field, which is the World War II airbase originally built by the Japanese, that turned into one of the most important strategic points, just because while the Americans held it, they could use it for tactical air support of both bombing ships and bombing ground targets, many of which were trying to take Henderson Field, and honestly many of the naval assets were trying to bombard Henderson Field to stop it. But for that sort of proximity, you want the dive bombers and torpedo bombers, which are the sort that start from a few thousand feet and dive in towards the target, whereas B-17, 10, 20, 30,000 feet up, takes you a while to get there, so you actually don't want them based too close. So you get them in far north Queensland. Lockhart River itself, as a town, last census population of 640, which, you know, and it's the place that's big enough to have an airport, which really tells you something about how distant from the population centres we're actually getting. And of course, in most commercial flights all along here, you'll get you'll just kind of fly directly past and not even notice all of these areas. But one thing that is significant about Lockhart River Airport is that during the tropical wet season, also known as, for the rest of Australia, summer, it is one of the only ways in and out of the communities, so Getting supplies in is one of the major things. Medical supplies, just general, food and other such things. Because the road in there is just completely unpassable for the wet season. So, bit of an interesting one of just, even when places are notably tiny, you still need these air transit links just to get anything in and out sometimes. Just a brief pause while I try and think up something to say, since we've got nobody in the passenger cabin and I've run through a lot of my info dumps lately. Yes, I am starting to wonder if there's something I should be changing about the streams. Possibly to make them get more people in. I'm not sure. We'll see how things go, but currently feeling just a little bit flat about the entire concept when we have just a bit of quiet in the passenger cabin. I do enjoy the flying and the rambling away, but just trying to work out how to keep the energy up. So, on a previous stream's rambling topics, I should actually remember to do my cruise setup on the engine, shouldn't I? So on a previous topic where I am working on my first ever cosplay, I have been making some delightful progress on that. The blaster itself is almost all constructed and approaching time for painting it. I have painted the power cell, which is, a replica-ish of the original Guns magazine that I'm going to be filling with LEDs to make cool effects. And I painted the little flip-up rear sight. So those have been the rear sight was a practice piece because it is the most easily rebuilt and most easily replaced part of the entire blaster. Since I've not done this kind of painting before. And the power cell is painted because it needs to be at least partially painted before I install the electronics in it, which are arriving hopefully on Tuesday as a pile of components. So we will see how things go with getting that together. Hello, Piney Tree. Hello, hello. How are you? I have just been... so the electronics arriving on Tuesday are the LEDs and control circuitry for the power cell for my Star Wars blaster prop. It is going to be glowing in a nice cyan colour with some animation in the LEDs, so it's going for which hopefully the effect works as well as as I've been hoping it will. Yes, I was just saying that I've started painting that whole project because the power cell needs to be painted before I can install the electronics in it. So it's now painted and looking really quite excellent, I think. I've not done the try to make a material look like another material before, so I've got clear acrylic and foam now looking like copper with some extra paint over the top, and it's amazing how much heavier it looks now. And just out of curiosity, I am now on my new microphone, which arrived between last stream and this one, so hopefully the sound quality of my voice is a little bit better for you. It's not a huge increase, but it is quite a oh, am I in fact quieter than the plane now? That's an interesting one. Interesting. Is it that my voice is too quiet, or is it that the plane is too loud? Okay, so possibly I was just speaking a little quietly. I changed nothing other than speaking up a little. Might ease the plane noise back just a little bit. And we'll see if that's a little bit better. It's always an interesting one of how loud I should be speaking for these and how much I need to be. With the old microphone setup, it was actually that I needed to not speak too loudly or it would just max out everything and start clipping. Did I? Interesting. I've turned the game audio back slightly. Haven't changed the microphone settings at all. Of course, it means that I'm now on 3, 4, 5 different bits of software controlling what the audio is doing. Let me just bump that slightly. Hopefully that will make it a little bit better as well. There are so many things changing, many of which are in fact just entirely inside my head, but it's always interesting with that sort of a complicated process. So I have boosted the gain slightly on the microphone on the software side. I also have the hardware side of the... Okay, so that one was boosting the software side input gain. Might set that to... Whoop. Okay, so hopefully that's going to be set. Well, I'm just watching the audio level stuff in OBS going straight into the red. So is this too loud now, or is it clipping or anything? It's really hard for me to tell. This is my first time working with... Okay, well that's good. So this is my first time working with a proper condenser mic instead of just a little electronic thing. Okay, that was me actually physically going quiet, so I do need to keep my voice up. That is noted. Well, that'll hopefully keep me a little more energetic. Wonder if there's anything I can do about that. Oh, what it actually did was turn off those, all of my adjustment settings. Apparently I slightly misclicked on something and it turned off all of the processing that it was doing on the sound. Okay, so if I talk at this sort of level now, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, is this adequate? Awesome. Okay, so what I in fact need to do is just make sure that that doesn't screw everything up for when I am trying. Okay, so it's now set so that I can actually speak a little more quietly, which is a much more comfortable range for my voice anyway, but just with a bit higher input gain. Ooh, we are getting into mysterious grey clouds. But we are on course at the correct altitude. That is excellent to hear. Okay, so apparently I need the input gain in the Logitech software set to 90, not 71. Ooh. Hello, coastline. Yes, crinkly bits. So we are currently coming over Cape Melville, which is just a small sticky out bit on the greater Cape York Peninsula. And as I was rambling just before you got here, our destination is Lockhart River Airport, which started its life as Iron Range Airport for the US Army Air Force. So that was both B-26 Marauder bombers and B-17 Flying Fortresses for, I'm assuming, bombing the nearby Solomon Islands during that quite large naval campaign. World War II. So yes, essentially straight northeast from where we are right now and where we're flying into is Papua New Guinea and then the Solomon Islands, which the Solomon Islands include such islands as Bougainville and Guadalcanal. So the air support for the Guadalcanal campaign was based on the island of Guadalcanal itself for the short-range, low-level things like dive bombers and torpedo bombers. But when you're using a B-17 and flying at 20-30,000 feet instead of 5 to 10, I mean, torpedo bombers make their attack runs in that period at about 100 feet. But when a B-17 is doing its attack run, it's 20-30,000 feet, and you need a while to get up to that altitude in a piston-driven propeller plane. So that's why you get bases on the Australian mainland. Quite hard to resupply those bases, being up on the tip of far north Queensland, essentially. And in fact, that is the main purpose of Lockhart River Airport now, which the local population in the town is 640 last census. But in the wet season, aka summer, which is the other end of the year to now, and the road gets inaccessible, if you need to get, say, medical supplies in, or if it's locked down for particularly long, every other kind of supplies, then it's good to have an airfield. So it is, I believe, nowhere near as big as it was in World War II. Seeing as it was, I think, up to 3 runways when it was operating as a full bomber base. Oh yes, as we get further north, we are going from places I've not been to places I've only vaguely heard anything about. And we are 1 flight away from reaching the tip of Cape York Peninsula. And the tip of Cape York Peninsula is the northernmost point of Australia. I'm pretty sure, unless there's some weird stuff going on. No, it should still be. And is the southern edge of the Torres Strait, which is the waterway between Australia and Papua New Guinea, and one of the areas that helped serve as inspiration for the Vangavia Bay, which is a very fun connection. And yes, one of the things that you will not notice out here is large population centres. Which also means that finding anywhere with larger airports, it's useful that we're in something that's large for a small airport, not large for a normal airport. Like as we saw on Lizard Island, where the runway is narrower than the wingspan, which made last time's landing interesting, and this week's takeoff not too bad. We could at least start off lined up with that. But yes, it's an interesting little one of finding where the next one to go is. It was originally, like, for the first few flights up the coast, it was very just pick between 4 different options for whichever is the length of flight I want to do. And the last couple, it's been, well, can I find a place that's seeming big enough to go to that's actually really in the direction we're trying to go? So that's been a fun one. Yeah, so just as you came in, the thing that I was rambling about was the cosplay stuff that I've been working on. So the blaster prop is... Yes, the dots are getting somewhat sparse, capital letters deserved. So the blaster prop for this Star Wars cosplay is almost to the end of the construction phases, which is very exciting, which is why I'm starting on the painting phases. And also the electronics. The helmet has been on hold a bit as my hyperfocus has gone to the blaster. And last night I patterned out the jacket/coat that I'll be wearing with it. Which was an interesting challenge because I've not actually patterned myself for anything in that category before. But seemed to go rather well. I did some things from measurements and basically first principles of what the components of a body block are, and thanks to some extended seam allowance and thanks to extended seam allowance and doing the stitching as extra long basting stitches that can be unpicked and resewn quickly, I've actually managed to get it fitting quite nicely now. So, at the moment I'm working on just plain calico muslin in American. Muslin in Australia is something very different. It's a type of cheesecloth. So using that for the patterning, and also it will be the lining once I've got that fully made up. And the outside fashion fabric is a very nice bottle green cotton drill, which in historical garb circles, cotton drill has a bit of a bad reputation as being the cheap fabric you use instead of something good, but it actually has a lovely twill pattern on it. It is sturdy and it's cotton, so I'm not wrapping myself in plastics. And one of the things I'm going to be working on is I'm going to be making sure that it's as comfortable as I can make it, and also not incredibly insulative. there's a fascinating thing that I've seen among cosplayers where because so many, especially anime characters, have outfits that are something you can draw but you can't really make. There's not so much of a focus on the comfort and like being actual clothing of the stuff. And coming in from both a historical costuming and a disability perspective, I plan on making this clothing and comfortable enough to just plain wear. Because if I can't wear it all day, what's the point? So working out exactly how to do it such that it's not just something that looks cool, but fits me well and won't cause overheating. So I'm planning on, like, one of the standard things I have is you can actually get linen viscous blend t-shirts are one of the things you can just buy in Australia now, and they make really good undershirts for things. And you know, all of the magical costuming effects of linen. So the basic plan is a t-shirt, probably one of my linen ones, under the jacket, which should make it comfortable enough to wear even in Australian summer. And if it's particularly cold, I can put something on under the jacket, like, you know, even a long sleeve t-shirt as well as a standard one. I mean, the viscous linen blend t-shirts are quite soft, quite delightful. Honestly, I mostly have the white ones because complicated things in my brain, and the white ones are a little bit too transparent for my likings, but I generally just wear them as my pajama shirts at the moment because they're that comfortable. It's not getting into spring. It's still most of a month away from spring here. It's it's cold. It is too cold. I don't like it. It's too cold. You know, it's getting up to like 14 here today. It's -2, -5 sort of thing most nights, which I'm not a fan of. Yes, one thing that you may find potentially quite weird is that in Australia the seasons actually line up for the months. The first day of spring is the 1st of September. The first day of summer is the 1st of December. We don't have this complicated pick a date randomly somewhere in the middle of a month, possibly controlled by a rodent. It's just the calendar. Like, I still don't quite understand the American system. Yeah, like, Punxsutawney Phil is one of those things of, look, the rest of the system is so weird that that might as well be what happens. Does he control the start of winter or the end of winter, or both? Because I know he controls Bill Murray. Look, I think you should have symbolic animals with unchecked control over the other seasons. Just... it's like Chattanooga Chucky, the possum who controls summer. Also, if he doesn't see his shadow, presumably that means that it's more overcast with diffuse light, which to me would make it warmer. And if he's not I think Punxsutawney Phil's methodology is reversed. And I think Chattanooga Chucky, the possum of summer, will have a much more, like, sensible way of determining. Like, yeah, just... Chattanooga Chucky just plays dead because it's too hot to move. Which I think is relatable to all of us. I mean, American Winter being controlled by a groundhog, which I only know about groundhogs because of Punxsutawney Phil. But American Winter being controlled by a groundhog kind of makes sense as... I mean, it's already really weird with all of the snow and stuff happening in places that aren't mountains. So, yeah, like, the groundhog is no weirder than the rest of your winter. Where are we? So we've got another 40 minutes in flight. Lovely. More of the very pretty reefs going on. And yes, so this is far north Queensland in what is for Australia winter, but because we are up past the tropic, it's actually just the dry season. It's 11 degrees outside at 8,000 feet. Let's see if I can identify that reef. It'll be... I believe that is... Corbett Reef. And then we have Grub Reef, and past that, Hedge Reef. Love a good reef name. And as we get even further along this little cluster of them, we've got Lytton Reef and then Magpie Reef, which is just ominous. I mean, this is part of the Great Barrier Reef, so I'm pretty sure it'll all be coral. Like, yes, we've been flying along the Great Barrier Reef for several streams now, but you did see the great part of Great Barrier Reef, right? The Great Barrier Reef is over 2,300 kilometers or 1,400 miles long. Basically, the entire coastline of North Queensland on the east side is the Great Barrier Reef. And, you know, it's not all one single reef, it is these many clusters of reefs. And you can see some more of its barrierness out that way. So that is more of the sandbank reefs and such like, which are mostly numbered from what I can see. Yes, there is a lot of Great Barrier Reef. And, occasional islands where... Oh, it's entirely a shipping hazard. It does have some protective effects for incoming waves and such, but it was named by people who were thinking from a shipping perspective. There are specific paths through the Great Barrier Reef, but despite a whole bunch of natural resources that we could be doing a colonialism to all through far north Queensland, the amount of trouble you'd have setting up a commercial or an industrial scale port here, because you have to get ships on the South Pacific coast through some fairly narrow channels, and if you get it wrong, the bottom of the ship rips open. And one of the things about reefs is that they bury quite well, because it's almost all underwater. Reefs are really good at hiding. And you can get ships through almost all of this. It's just not worth it. I think 2 streams ago there was the last, the furthest north industrial port facility in Queensland, because it was at one of those gaps in the Great Barrier Reef. Yes, it would be interesting to see what the effect the Great Barrier Reef would have on a tsunami coming in, because I think it would actually do some interesting disruption on that too. But it's not been particularly heavily tested, as far as I know. I mean, it's not something you can test at will anyway. Oh yeah, the thing about being on a river is that for every stage of civilization, there's an advantage to being on the river. Even if you're on the coastline already, on the river is still an advantage. Utter basic stuff of, turns out humans need water. And humans need fresh water, not salt water. So, if you can manage to put your, the spot you'll stop long enough to turn into a settlement, into a village, into a town, into a city, is going to be a place where you can drink. Eventually you get more interesting water infrastructure, but that's usually for... This river is either too polluted or doesn't have enough water for the city we put on it, which is where you get aqueducts and more modern water transport infrastructure. But then you consider the fact that until essentially the 20th century, rivers were one of the primary modes of transport. Rivers and the rivers we dug ourselves, aka canals, if you need to carry anything that's heavy, you take it on water. If it's pulled by a horse, you can't go uphill with anything heavy, really. You can't go uphill in water anyway, but the water will go away that's not up hills. And you can't put a road there because it's already a river. So, medieval fantasy fiction needs a lot more stuff on the water, riverboats and the like. It's one of the biggest sources of income for a lot of cities was control of the river that was a major, essentially, commerce highway through the region. Oh, you want to take that through our city down the river? Cool, here's our tax rates. Oh, you're taking this stuff to the next city along that we hate. I think you should sell that here, actually. No, you won't get a higher price because that's not leaving the city. You can just sell that here. So yes, having the rights to tax the rivers, such as by having an army and a city, is a really great way to fund your city's budget. And of course, as you keep going, then just being on the river for your own trade access, and as mentioned, ports. There are fewer rivers that are navigable to modern cargo shipping, but it's not too long ago that the major like, the reason that New Orleans is where it is and is as large and has been as successful as it previously has been is that it's the water route from the ocean to most of the US interior, because the main commerce route was the Mississippi. And yeah, when you look at a lot of medieval history stuff, like, there are lovely maps of particularly England that I've seen, where the number of navigable rivers and almost nowhere in England is more than a day's travel from one on foot. Oh yeah, the size of the Mississippi River. Any given section of the Mississippi, if it was in Australia, would be considered to be a large lake. We don't have rivers that wide. Like, I think by American standards, Australia just doesn't have rivers. Like, the Murray River that we've flown down to before, you know, it is a major enough river by Australian standards that it is a state border. Gets up to 100 meters wide in the big bits. Like, you don't need special infrastructure, bridge building techniques, etc. to get over the Murray. You just need a normal bridge. The Mississippi, you get all of these amazing huge bridges, which on the Murray you only get in the last little bit where it's starting to turn into ocean. One of my favourite examples of the effect on a civilization that having control of the river will give you is, of course, Egypt. The classical definition of where Egypt ends is the First Cataract. So, the ground under Egypt is mostly sedimentary, you know, limestone, sandstone, that sort of thing, which the river can cut through just fine. But there's these bands of granite that pass along vaguely east to west, where the Nile has not actually managed to cut a full river channel into these bands of granite. So you have what are essentially a set of rapids on the Nile And counting from the north, they are just like numbered first cataract, second cataract, third cataract. And you cannot get a boat through the cataracts. So when you hear cataract these days, you kind of think of like big waterfalls, but cataract just means the place where the water flows downwards. And yeah, it is just, there's a lot of rocks in the river and it's rapids and all this sort of stuff. So the way that you would get a boat past each cataract is by taking it onto the sand and pulling it. So the classical definition of where Egypt stops is the first cataract. Everything from there to the Mediterranean that you can just sail was Egypt. Because by controlling the river, you controlled all of the habitable land, because all of the habitable land was on the river. And past the first cataract, look, drag or carry, dragging things across sand in particular is actually easier than carrying a lot of the time. There's a reason that they pulled the giant rocks, not carried them, when they were building all of the big stone monuments. But yeah, so everything between the first and third cataracts were kind of a border area a lot of the time, and then past the third cataract, in fact, starting exactly at the third cataract, is Nubia, which is now Sudan. The Nubian capital was, I think, at the third cataract, and then the Egyptians built a city exactly opposite during one of their military campaigns, and the entire city essentially moved across the river to be in the Egyptian one. It's weird. And of course, later on, the Nubians conquered Egypt once, well, Egypt got conquered by Libyans and Assyrians, essentially. And the Nubians, who are now Sudanese, or whose area is now Sudan, how the cultures carry through is complicated. All of that... so they had been kind of converted to Egyptian culture and religion in previous centuries, and they kept it longer than the core of Egypt, when Egypt got conquered several times. So when the Nubians conquered Egypt in their turn, there was actually a bit of a renaissance of Egyptian culture, because they just brought it back. There is a lot of fascinating complexity around ancient Egypt that gets kind of ignored. One of my favorites is the whole concept of Upper and Lower Egypt. Because so the two regions of ancient Egypt are Upper and Lower Egypt. Upper is actually the southern section, and Lower Egypt is the northern section, because Upper Egypt is the upstream section of Egypt, because they don't need compasses. They really don't. You don't need a compass in Egypt. You have the river, and you can see which way it's flowing, and that's the only really important direction. Like, and the place that the border of Upper and Lower Egypt is the essentially where Cairo is. It's the place where the river splits out into the delta. So that lovely fan shape where the entire place turns green, where because the river starts depositing silts that it's carrying as it enters the ocean, it kind of starts to block itself up and flows to the next bit and splits out. Like, the entire hydrological systems involved in making a delta are fascinating and complicated. But the bit where it fans out and you get a much larger green area is Lower Egypt. You can't build huge structures in Lower Egypt because it's all river delta, so that's, you know, wet. But you can grow food a bit better there because it's wet. And yeah, so Upper Egypt, where you've got, you know, more stony things that you can build on, is where you get all of the interesting monuments. Some of them, you know, as far north in Upper Egypt as basically at the edge. You know, Cairo is essentially right where Giza is as well. And, you know, within Egypt proper, by the old definition, you get things as far south as at Aswan, the first cataract. If you want to see some really, really weird 20th century engineering-ish content, look up the construction of the Aswan High Dam and the relocations that they had to do for that. So one of the great temples of Ramesses II had to be moved. It was carved into a mountain and they moved it. Abu Simbel. Because they built a dam at Aswan, the first cataract, to control the flow of water through the Nile, electrical power generation, all the usual things that people build dams for. And it flooded this whole section that was actually archaeologically fascinating. And some of the stuff, they decided, we're just gonna move this. I don't care that it was carved into the mountain, we're moving it. Bring the mountain. And the funding around the Aswan Dam gets really fascinating because it was a Cold War project. Let me just see if I can double check pictures. But yeah, if you look up Abu Simbel move in Google Google Images, you will get some fascinating fascinating pictures. Like, it's one of the classic oh, what it did to the archaeological site in terms of context, whatever wasn't recorded before the move is gone. That's just anything that they didn't record before the move and isn't part of the structure as reconstructed is gone. That's how it works. Dam construction is really interesting because of what it does to archaeological sites. There are multiple cases. Some controversy. Yeah. Like, there is a reason that dam projects are almost always controversial. There's so many things that can go weird with them, and what they do with archaeological sites is fascinating. So, one of the spicier ones... Actually, no, before we get to the spicy ones, we'll do the other interesting one. The Three Gorges Dam in China, now the largest dam, largest reservoir in the world. This thing is utterly... We don't have words for the scale of the Three Gorges Dam. They had to relocate a lot of people who were living in what is now the reservoir. But there's also archaeological sites of huge cultural importance, like, you know, ancient temples and that sort of thing. And what the Chinese did, because the dam and because the reservoir is so big, they didn't move these ancient archaeological sites. They just made cofferdams, like little ring dams to keep the water out of these sites. Which is utterly fascinating in a... If you look at any of the stuff of just like, yeah, like, this ancient site's going to be flooded if we... I have no idea what inverse Minnesota means, but I'm fascinated. But yeah, like, some of the the most important archaeological sites in the Three Gorges Dam, they just dammed those off as well. So, the one that gets spicy is the dam projects in Turkey. Because there's a lot of river valleys in Turkey that would make excellent dam reservoirs for power generation and for stockpiling fresh water. And, like, Turkey needs it. That, from a purely humanitarian point of view, giving Turkey access to consistent electricity and more drinking water would be good. But the thing about all of these little river valleys in Turkey is that they are home to some of the first archaeological sites, like the earliest shreds of what would become civilization in these river valleys in Turkey. So you get, let's face it, rich Westerners objecting to every dam project in Turkey but we haven't checked for archaeological stuff in that valley. But even as somebody who is very much on the side of preserving archaeology, I don't know if you can actually make a moral case for not building dams that would save and improve a lot of lives. You just got to accept that, you know what? History keeps happening, and sometimes the next bit of history of this not yet excavated archaeological site is that it got flooded. Like, Turkey don't have the financial resources to excavate all of these sites. That would essentially be excavating all of Turkey. And I think you just need to accept that, no, some of these are getting lost. Yes, they're fascinating glimpses into 10,000 years ago. But it's not 10,000 years ago. So, you know, the most famous one is a lovely place called Potbelly Hill, or in Turkish, Göbekli Tepe, which is actually on a hill, mostly. But there's a whole set of... Because that thing where humans have always liked to live along rivers, yeah, even 10,000 years ago, we like to be along the rivers. There's more drinking water there. And yeah, underwater archaeology is actually a thing that exists. It's a whole other rant, I will fully admit, which, you know, there are places where you're doing underwater archaeology, like Doggerland. The entire subject of Doggerland is fascinating because it's named after fishing boats, despite formerly being land. Doggerland is now better known as the North Sea. Yeah, anyone who's looking for Atlantis is really just... like, Atlantis is from a fictional story by Plato. It was an allegory, and directly stated to be fictional. Okay, name for fishing boats. Yes, so Doggerland is a now sunken landmass east of England, and so the last sunken bits of Doggerland are essentially that bit where the Netherlands just angles down into the sea. It just used to keep going up into most of, like, a decent chunk of the North Sea. And, like, the Rhine River actually continued into Doggerland, where it joined up with the Thames and then flowed west and is part of what cut the English Channel. That was a river valley. What's the highest point of it that's underwater is called Dogger Bank, and Dogger Bank is named for a Dutch word for a type of fisher boat. Yeah, the maps of Doggerland get fascinating. The way they discovered it was one of these fishing boats pulled up, like, occasionally they'll pull up lumps of the sea floor that's actually just the land surface of Doggerland, and they pulled up this lump of peat with a spearhead in it, and the spearhead was made out of barbed, I think it was either bone or antler, and they could tell from it that the spearhead was in this lump of peat when it formed into peat, and that this peat formed in fresh water. Okay, starting to prepare for our approach into Lockhart River, which is just another traffic channel airport. Looks to be a little bit windy there, but we will make do. I mean, they could tell that that particular type of peat was in fresh water. I believe there are some others when you consider that it is decayed plant matter of various kinds, but, like, they could tell that it had formed in situ where it was pulled up from. Lockhart River traffic, Martel 2515 miles southeast at 8,000 feet, inbound to land on runway 12. Okay. Attention passengers, we're now approaching Lockhart River Airport, and I've switched on the seatbelt lights, which has in fact remained on, so I'd like you to double check that your seatbelts are fastened. And as we come in towards landing, thank you again for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Oh yeah, sphagnum moss is wild. Okay. Ascent checklist. Anti-ice and not required. Inertial separator handle normal. Altimeter QNH double checked. Nav source is set. What is that doing? So yes, to come in on runway 12, we will need to come in over on that side. We won't be doing a full nav approach, of course, but let's get down to 2,000 feet. Oop. Oh, it is some bumpity. But we have... Ooh, why is that zoomed in all the way? Whoops. No idea how long the nav map has been zoomed in ridiculously far, but... there we go. And there's our airport. And yep, we are down to just a single runway down from the much larger bomber base that this used to be. Oh, we've got some spicy winds going on at both ends of the flight today. That's fascinating. Okay, approach checklist. Landing lights on, seatbelt light on, fuel tank selectors both on, fuel condition high idle, prop RPM to max, flaps to approach position we will hold off on for now. Going to be doing a lower flap setting landing, I think. See how we are on the approach part of this, given the how spicy the winds are getting. There's our airport. Looks like the parking options are about middle of the runway sort of thing. Lovely, lovely. And we're still descending down towards our landing pattern altitude. Lockhart River traffic, Martel 25 is entering downwind leg, runway 12. And of course it is fairly unlikely to be dealing with any other traffic on this sort of airport. But we keep our eyes open and do all of the proper things. And we keep an eye on our radar altimeter. Lovely, lovely. Okay, and now we go to the approach flaps. And we are definitely getting down into some mountains here. What fun. And as we get to our altitude, monitoring the airspeed. And it's a bumpy ride. We're gonna fly by hand. Lockhart River traffic, Martel 25 is turning final, runway 12 for landing. Watching all of those lovely, lovely trees, mountains, far north Queensland rainforest that we don't want to land in. We want to land in the part that is a runway. Okay, seatbelt light on, flaps to landing position. And there's the runway. Yeah, I think the flat bit that's like marked up for landing on would be a better landing place than the bit that is trees. Bit of a crosswind coming in, even if it thinks it's fairly mild, but... Okay, so we've got a very variable headwind that's sometimes 20 knots, sometimes bouncing up to 30, which means that our nice, 85 knot landing speed is actually going to be 50 to 60 knots across the ground, so it feels like we're floating because we're doing a lot faster through the air than we are across the ground, but the visual references are based on the ground. Ooh, and as we come below tree, or I think that's below mountain level, a lot of the wind just died down, so one of the fascinating things about landing with these sorts of heavy and variable winds is that if the wind suddenly changes and your speed across the ground is no longer adequate to the speed through the air that you require, you might explode. And yes, thank you for the trees perspective on landing on trees. We prefer trees in the passenger cabin calmly through the door, not suddenly through the floor. up. And braking. So, a wider runway here that's, you know, much nicer for landing a plane of this size on than the last place. Oop. And you might think... Oh. Okay, that turn did not go well. But luckily it is just hard-packed dirt here. And you might think, what luck to have the wind blowing exactly down the runway. But most places the wind is usually, like, when the wind's blowing strongly, it's usually in basically the same direction. So, when you're designing the airport, you just build the runway pointing that direction. But the floating sensation there from the everything blowing such a strong headwind was fascinating. Okay, flaps are up. Anti-ice is off. Standby, alt power. And yeah, it turns out paper planes do use the same physics as normal planes. Just stop here for a sec. Lockhart River traffic. Martel 25 is clear of the runway. Before arrival taxi checklist. Taxi lights on, landing lights off, strobe lights off, seatbelt lights on, taxi clearance. Not necessary at this airport. Inertial separator handle to bypass. Prop RPM to minimum. Fuel condition low idle. And parking brake is off. Attention passengers, we've landed safely in Lockhart River and the local time is 1:42 PM. Please remain seated until the plane comes to a complete stop at whatever ridiculous parking spot they give us, because queuing for the exit in an 8-seater makes you look even more ridiculous than normal. Now, where are they going to get us? And yes, the colour of the runways, I believe, is... The dark bits are extra rubber put down by the many, many wheels of planes landing there. I think we'll be parking over at this fuel pump here. Because you want to aim to land in about the same spot all the time, and the better you get at that, the better certain other things become. Parking brake on. And yes, the rest of it is... Fundamentally, it's not that different from the sort of materials that they make roads out of. Okay, shutdown checklist. Parking brake handle set. Power lever idle. Lead air heat switch off. ITT range is stable. Prop RPM feather. Fuel condition lever cut. Inertial separator handle normal. External lights off. Seatbelt lights off. Attention passengers, this now concludes our flight from Lizard Island to Lockhart River, and we here at Martel Air hope you've enjoyed your time in our tiny sky bus. Please wait until I've opened the door and you can calmly deplane in an orderly fashion. Our baggage handling services today will be provided by our wonderful passengers, so thank you for not leaving any of your luggage behind. Any personal belongings left behind as you leave the plane will be assumed to be a present to the co-pilot and enjoyed thoroughly. And on your way out, remember that there is a coffee machine at the back for your refreshments and to fund Wing Commander Lamington's dog treat habit. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Okay, internal lights off. Fuel boost switch off. NG0 check. Avionics 2 off. Avionics 1 off. Battery switch off. And fuel tank selectors both off. Down checklist complete. Yes, that gets us to the end of this week's stream. I will not be here next week as I will be helping a friend move as the one in the social group with a large car and a large trailer. So I will see you hopefully in 2 weeks' time. And unless you had any last minute questions about my ramblings, I think we can leave it there. Right. Have a good week, and I will see you at the next one. I am glad you enjoyed it.